We're the Queer South, and we're a zine project started out Fayetteville, Arkansas. And this presentation today will go through several different things. I don't really have too much to say on the first slide, but just like look at our cute font and a presentation for campaign for Southern Equality and Southern Equality Studios. Yeah. Our mission aims to amplify LGBTQ plus Southern voices and bolster community building by providing an outlet for queer expression. How we're doing this is one, through the construction of the zine, two, through social media, and three, through community events. Our hope is that through our mission and this project, that we provide a space that is as accessible as it possibly can be and becoming more accessible every day, that people can access stories that resonate with them. And I'll get more into why that resonating with stories is so important, at least to me, and Brylan and Addie can also talk about that as well. And here's that part. But we're gonna give a more an insider introduction on why we're doing this project, kind of like personal reasons, but who are we and why the Queer South? Well, some of my background, most of my organizing background actually stemmed from the sexual violence prevention movement. So that's where I really started doing my work. And in that, I realized, and also trigger warning, mentions of sexual violence, nothing graphic or anything, but like becoming a survivor, I had to turn to looking for stories and trying to find something where I could kind of understand why things happened to me and why I felt the way that I did. And when I could not find any Southern stories about sexual violence within the queer community, it was really hard. So from there, decided to start creating projects, specifically community projects on my university campus that could help us tell our stories in different ways. So on the left side of the screen, you can see a collage that I actually made at one of our events that's called Letters to Survivors. And we kind of did this so anyone could find it accessible to tell a story that was really important to them. With this, the prompt was a good experience with consent. And I felt that was really important to kind of talk about. And it's really kind of what sparked this idea for the zine in my mind. Because I realized that there was a lot of stories that were not being told or hidden from the public. But yeah, Brylan, if you kind of want to talk about your stuff as well.
Yeah. So I this is some of my art on the far right side of the screen. I mainly do work in sculptures. There's my little church pew. That is one of my main passions is being an artist. But outside of that, I'm an arts administrator. I just really love accessibility whenever it comes to the art. It comes to art, being culturally responsive. All of that's super important to me. So the zine just makes sense, combining all of the writing, the arts. It's great. We have some of Addie's article, one of Addie's articles in the middle, to where her background, she is a writer, she's an editor, and she's just really helping to put out some of the work in that space. It's really neat.
Um, it's important that we define the queer South when we talk about this, because I think a lot of times when there are people claiming to represent the South in very specific ways, it can become convoluted and very confusing when we say the South. So we define the queer South as the stories and experiences of LGBTQ plus people that have lived in the US South. Another reason why we think it's important to do this, because a lot of times in organizing spaces, at least this has been my experience, when we talk about changing things systemically in the South and talking about these stories and our end goal and our mission, a lot of times we get people from outside of this area coming in and not building community, more so speaking over our experiences and what they think is right and bringing down resources that are not actually beneficial. So this is why we define the queer South this way. And it also blends into like why we're doing this. And this is basically why you should care. The South is home to more LGBTQ plus people than any other region across the US. Despite this fact, queer Southerners face some of the most severe forms of violence, including anti-trans legislation, book bans, and disproportionate harm from issues such as sexual violence. Like I said, when it comes to my background in sexual violence organizing, a lot of times we're not represented in the research that is being done. And I think that's true across all bounds. We hear stories about what it's like to experience a book ban in a small rural county in a place like Texas or elsewhere, Florida or anything like that. And creating a zine allows for us to create informal networks where we can talk about our experiences and create educational networks that are super beneficial and fighting against the violence that we're experiencing currently.
Yeah, Reed mentions these networks that zines help create and provide. We have a quick definition. A zine is a small, self-published magazine, often connecting communities outside of traditional spaces of power. The history of zines are political. Normally, they were used as a vehicle for communities to communicate with each other, normally on very niche topics that aren't covered in mass media, especially print media. So that's why they're really special for us, is we're just really leaning into that history and creating a community among queer Southerners. We have yep. We have a quick timeline going from 1900 to present on zines. We have some quotes here I can read out at the beginning. American zines trace their origins to the amateur press movement of the early 20th century, when amateur printers purchased their own presses in order to produce small works concerning a specific topic or interest. The example here to the right is really interesting. Some Black Southern artists were creating this really powerful zine talking about issues because, once again, these are communities that are outside of these traditional spaces of power, and they're needing a way to communicate issues that are facing their community. One thing that is really interesting to me, or is a good example of people doing this, is in the beginning of the 1920s, we have the Harlem Renaissance. We have Black people who are multidisciplinary artists, writers, and they're coming together and they're just having this creative explosion happening within their communities. And zines were a part of that in the early 1920s, late 1930s, to where they were spreading these works that the people were creating within Harlem and in these communities. And then after 1930, from 1930 to 1970, obviously roots of zines are in these political messages and connecting these communities. And then we start to see people use them for fun. They were used back then as well, but we're seeing the rise of fanzines. We have the Comet, which is the first fanzine that was coming out in the 1930s, and people who were gathering community over just special topics and interests and having fun together, which I think that's really special as well, showing how we can combine these political messages with also just finding friends and finding community. After 1970, we're starting. I remember someone mentioned about like cyanotypes, and I think that's really interesting because we're also seeing the rise of the photocopier after 1970. Xenography is an art form, which this for me is where zines start to really get interesting, and where I, like as an artist and as someone who's thinking about the creative direction of this zine, is pulling a lot of inspiration. Before, I feel zines were largely just acting as, like other magazines, they were communicating a message. But here with photocopiers, we're starting to see more collage elements coming in, and zines being viewed as an art form, which is really special. The covers and the pages, they're becoming pieces in themselves, and that's super special to me. Obviously, we're seeing rises of punk. We're getting like more of this grunge aesthetic coming on, which I feel like is what a lot of us commonly associate with zines. After 1990, we have our 1990 to present. I love the shout out to Riot Girl. If you haven't read through some of their zines or looked at their material, it's super cool. Just discussing some feminist issues, kind of combining those punk rock themes. Covers look amazing. We also have some quick mock-ups that we generated about the queer South. I think now we have zines electronically. We have e-zines. We still have, on paper, which I think is really special. And that's one of our end goals, is we will be having zine like on paper, as well as that people can find through hopefully a website and our Instagram. Zines now, I feel like we're leaning into our history, and we're thinking about ways in which we can create community for Southerners, queer Southerners, how we can also bring up some of those issues that we're facing, whether it's sexual violence, the marginalization, the not being represented. We're kind of bringing in all these things together in the queer South to um, create that community, highlight some of these issues, and just show people that we're here, we're creative, we're existing in this space, we're being innovative. And I'm just super excited to see how we can contribute to this current zine narrative.
Yeah, we also, along with the timeline, want to talk about how zines can be subversive. Self-publishing, largely created by minoritized communities that center intersectional viewpoints and challenging the system, is a lot of where these zines that we were just talking about come from. And we think this is really important in an era in which we are talking about, and our timelines are being basically bombarded by a lot of political conversations about how can this governmental system best help us. It's important for people that are queer and from marginalized communities to understand that the only things that we can rely on is the community that we build around us. And I think that that's what we're trying to do with the zine. We want to connect people from communities across the South and let them know that there are stories that you can find yourself in, even if it's not your exact experience. And the ways that these are subversive is that we're not going through this very like proper like publishing style like we talked about with these former zines such as like little magazines of the Harlem Renaissance. The way that these Black artists and writers were able to communicate with others is that they operated outside established literary systems, and that is something that we're very much trying to do. So not only creating a zine based on community stories and sending them to communities, but finding also like local queer bookstores in the South to either hand out these zines and see if people want to provide money for us to continue printing and running a website where you can find stories about your own community. And yeah, that's
I
pretty
think
much.
that's what's so special about us is this work is coming directly from contributors. So there's no middle agent. Like these stories are coming from the queer South and being delivered directly to the queer South. And I think just that raw connection is so special.
Yeah, and this is basically how we're creating change, but we're providing a space to archive queer Southern stories. And our hope is as we further develop that, and I'll give you a little insight on kind of what I've been thinking about and what I've been talking to Brylan and Addie about. But our hope is that we can one day create little kind of almost care packages in a sense that put a bunch of zine products inside of the care packages and send them out to people for free, so that they can make their own zine about their own story. And if they want to, they can then scan that zine and send it back to us so that we can archive it. And it shows this like living, breathing, like archive of these stories that don't have to be in the zine, but just like about very specific things. I mean, zines are very small. Usually they're 8 pages and things like that. Our zine is arguably more of a magazine than it is a zine. But we also want to provide resources to rural queer Southerners so the communities we come from are able to make zines of their own. That comes from one, that project of giving people zine projects, but also being able to be in community with people like the Campaign for Southern Equality and Southern Equality Studios allows us to better connect with our community. I'm very happy to be here today and look at everyone's faces. I think we're in a time where community means a lot to us, and it's very difficult sometimes to find people that represent um, what you need. But we're also using social media and the zine to educate others on what the queer Southerner experience can be and the implications are pushing our existence. So we've referenced a lot about the erasure of our stories and how this is challenging that, but also people that are just curious about our history and all these other things. We see a lot of archives on Instagram, such as like I think it's like Lavender Zines, like archive or something like that, and several others that are doing really cool work of making public archives that are accessible to us, on past scenes that have been created and past work by queer artists, that we're doing a lot of things outside of established systems. And I think that's very cool. And then we have a little interactive session if you want to contribute to kind of to our social media things that we're doing. But one of the things that we do is we have this, I guess, like consistent stream of posts that we have that is titled "What does a queer South mean to you?" And we have a form in our bio, but also you can scan the QR code and get to the form. But all we're asking is that you answer that question, and oftentimes we'll post quotes from that onto our social media because I think it's good to kind of go back and see like at the basis, what does this mean to you? We get very like positive responses resonating with people being in the South, but we also get, I don't even want to say negative, but just like things that are negative experience of the South, because that is our reality as queer people that live here. So if you want to take the time to like scan the QR code and go and submit something, we would love to see that content and hopefully put it out if that's something you're into. Um, but yeah.
And you can find this through our link tree on our Instagram there too.
uh,
So if
and
you
those
want to after the presentation.
Yeah, and there's our at the Queer South Zine. If you don't follow us already, we're doing our best to try and post as much as we can and kind of talk about issues that are outside of zines and just like queer issues in general.
But yeah, thank you guys for listening. If you have any questions about the zine or the work that we're doing in general, we'd love to hear them. Otherwise, thank you for your time today to just kind of listen in.
Yes, very, very, very grateful. Thank you so much, and I'm very happy to be here, like I said.